Interesting times. All right, so I'm talking about ChatGPT. I'm Steve Stalzer. I'm the VP of Applied AI here at McGraw Hill in the Digital Platform Group. A little background about me. I've spent over a decade building descriptive, predictive, and prescriptive analytical systems, four of them here at McGraw Hill. A number of other companies as well. 6 years in the ed tech industry. Prior to that, I worked in gaming. I worked for Warner Brothers Games and worked on a lot of the really big Xbox, PlayStation games from the data platform side. And then before that, I was doing data platforms at Nokia and also did a bunch of mobile application development. So my background's kind of diverse. I have a master's degree in education from Harvard Graduate School of Education, and I also was a K through 12 teacher for a number of years. There we go. I thought it would be good to just give a really quick history of generative AI. People have been trying to do this for a very long time without a lot of success until recently. But attempts to simulate intelligent human-like speech go back to, at least the late 80s, if not earlier. I remember after college, starting to interact with some systems that did a pretty poor job. Mostly they were based on rules, so expert systems is what we call them. And there was sort of a plateau that AI got to for quite a few decades. But the availability of faster and cheaper CPUs, largely due to cloud computing, started to really make a lot of things possible. Coincidentally, the GPUs that are used, the graphic processor units that are used in the gaming world, turned out to be the best processors to use for AI, and those are the ones now that are being used because they can do many, many calculations very, very quickly. Also, obviously, we've been generating a tremendous amount of text and image data over the last 20 years or so, and the rate at which data is available to train these models is growing exponentially. And in the last really like 2 to 3 years, things have really picked up, in particular on the language modeling side. So there's a very important model called the BERT model that came out that started to really be able to do some very cool things like translation from one language to another and the beginnings of being able to represent human-like speech. And then of course GPT, which is actually based on that. And some of the models are beginning to pass the Turing test, and I think that's why everybody's freaking out. So the Turing test is, can you tell the difference between human-generated content versus interacting with an AI? And in some limited cases, it really is hard to tell. The current state is really that we're in a very fast growth period now. So most of you have probably heard of some of this generative content happening. It's mostly image generation and generalized conversational AI. Conversational AI, you can think of Siri or Alexa. They've been around for a while, but now it's growing to include text. Image generation is you type in some text and it'll create an image for you based upon the text that you typed in. There's a huge tech war going on right now. Microsoft is spending $10 billion on OpenAI and has a strong partnership with them. Google is trying to say, hey, we have this too. And they'll, as always in the industry, you'll see one player or another probably dominate over time and try to really influence the next generation of search. That's really what they're interested in. And there are some limitations right now. If you've used ChatGPT at all, you'll notice, for example, that it's not always accurate. It sounds really good, but then when you sort of start to dig into some of the facts, you say, maybe that's not really quite right. Doesn't do a very good job in math, for example. It tends to do something which people are starting to call hallucination, which is sort of making up its own facts. And there's some challenges around bias and copyright infringement as well. A lot of these are probably going to go away over time, making it even harder to distinguish what is human and what is AI generated. GPT-4 is coming out and will be at least an order of magnitude larger than ChatGPT is currently now. So just for those of you who don't have a lot of experience with this, I have a couple of quick examples. This is an example of an image generation tool called DALL-E, which is also provided by OpenAI, and the prompt was simply create an orange Darth Vader for me in a digital art style. And what's cool about this application is you can tell it I wanted an illustrative style, do it like a third grader will draw it, and so on, and it'll do it in different styles, and then you can continue to iterate on it. And you can see immediately that how easily copyright issues can come up, right? If I use this in a textbook, well, I'm now going to have an issue with with the owner of this copyright. Even though it's orange, it's still very recognizable as Darth Vader. For the actual text, which is most of what we're going to talk about today for Chat GPT, there's a couple of examples here. On the left, where it says ST, that's me, Steve. So I said, describe the events that led to the extinction of the dinosaur in 100 words or less, and do it in the style of an undergraduate student. And I'll give you a minute to read the output there, and you can see if you think it sounds human-like or not.
There's no voice. Sorry.
But I thought it was pretty good. I did a number of these, and each time it was slightly different, with slightly different ways of doing the facts. The interesting thing about ChatGPT, though, is that you can interact with it. So now I can say, rewrite the previous response in the style of a high school student, and it gives me more or less the same facts, but with different type of dialogue, right? And that's one of the reasons why it's challenging to detect, because you can do things like, say, write it as a non-English speaker, or write it as if you had some spelling issues, put 2 to 3 typos in, and it'll do it for you. So how are students actually using it? As we know, some students are writing entire essays based on a prompt already. This is happening in higher ed. Generation for new ideas for composition is another thing that students are starting to use it for, just to get started, basically, in their composition. Collaborative writing is an area that I think has a lot of fruit there to be picked over time. I think, creating drafts and then doing edits to that and working collaboratively with the code or with the application is another interesting use case. Some students are writing computer code with it. It does okay with relatively simple code. Longer things, you really do need to know what you're doing, and you need to go in and edit it and fix mistakes currently. That might change. Creating images for social media posts, like the Darth Vader one. A lot of kids are creating avatars and using that, or they do a piece and they publish it in a blog and they need an image, so they'll use it that way. Search is starting to slowly be replaced. It's a lot easier to ask ChatGPT, what are the things that could be wrong with my 1990 Nissan carburetor, than to do look through lots of YouTube videos and try to figure out what's going on there. And language translation, which was one of the original reasons for it, is still going strong. There are obviously impacts for higher education. That's why we're here today. The kind of 3 areas that I see the most, people talking about the most and seem to have the largest impact, that we're talking about a lot here internally, is instruction, institutional policies, and then how does it really impact things like research teams and folks that are involved in IT. Instruction, what I'm mostly hearing is assessment approaches are going to have to change. How are we going to do that? Are we going to go back to, handwriting assessments, or, what can technology do to help there? Group assignments potentially are going to, be coming back in more strength, doing more handwritten work overall, limiting take-home work, something that I hear, more sort of in class, old school, which, can be a trade-off, right? And then certainly institutional policies. It seems like very few institutions right now have really changed their policies yet. The ones that they have been, looking at most deeply are academic integrity, obviously. But then, most schools have acceptable use for the technology. There's DEI to consider, accessibility, data privacy when students are uploading things, and that kind of thing, and security. So a lot of impacts. I'm sure we'll hit on some of this today. I'm an optimist, so being a technology guy and being the person who is responsible for trying to drive AI-assisted solutions into our products, I think that there's a lot that we can do with it. I think in particular, I'm interested in student and faculty digital literacy. I think that there's a whole new area opening up for how do you interact with these kinds of applications, right? There's something called prompt engineering that people are starting to use as a word, which means I'm working with ChatGPT. How do I write the prompts in a way that I get the kind of output that is most useful to me, right? Or collaborative work, collaborative AI work, where AI informs you and you're working closely with it, right? And you're trying to, move things forward that way. Enhanced teaching, I think, is another big area. So, it's a really great opportunity for ChatGPT in particular to use it in such a way that you can do critical analysis, use it as an opportunity for students to really focus on, those critical thinking skills, right? Fact checking, editing, how do I determine, what is truthful, what isn't, and so on. And then there's a lot of tools just, for instructors, administrators, and students. Many of these we're thinking about, and some we're actually working on already, which is things like automation of frequent communication, which you can use AI for, creation of frequently asked questions to pull together the kinds of things that normally, students may want to ask about a particular class or about materials. Personalized instructional materials, that's been around for a long time, right? If you look at our Alex or other AI driven, adaptive learning, that's one avenue there that I think will continue to get stronger. Personalized interventions. So, we're currently working on a risk scoring mechanism, which is AI based, which will predict the probability that a student will fail a course. And we can predict it in week 4 of a week 16 course, and then give you very specific interventions that you can do week to week with the student to get them back on track. So that's a good use of AI, I think. And then, discussion prompts and trying to create practice questions very easily are things that we're also looking at.